Boosting good governance in Africa. A newly established generous prize is meant to encourage the continent's leaders to be less corrupt. But can these kinds of initiatives remedy Africa's many illnesses? And at what cost? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sahil Rahman. Do your job and do it right. This is all an African leader has to do to win the Mo Ibrahim prize of $5 million paid over 10 years and $200,000 annually for life thereafter. And the winner of this grand prize for the year 2008 is Botswana's former president, Festus Mogae, for ensuring stability and prosperity in his country. Former United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan made the announcement on Monday at London City Hall.
I am delighted to announce that the winner is Festus Mogae. When elected in 1998, President Festus Mogae took over a country which was already one of the continent's success stories. Its democracy was strong, stable, and rooted in the rule of law. Botswana was widely regarded as one of the more effective countries in the world in combating corruption. President Mogae's outstanding leadership has ensured Botswana's continued stability and prosperity in the face of HIV/AIDS pandemic, which threatened the future of his country and people. This greatly impressed the committee.
Spearheaded and funded by a Sudanese-born British billionaire, the motive is quite simply to promote good governance in Africa. Unprecedented in its scale and scope, the prize is awarded annually to an African executive, head of state or government who's demonstrated excellence in African leadership. Eligible candidates will have taken office democratically and have having served the constitutional term stipulated. The candidate must have made a considerable effort to combat corruption and work diligently for the welfare of his people. The motive is impeccable: encourage African leaders to become less corrupt and more honest and transparent. But how is that measured? What makes an award-winning leader? And how can the prize committee tell one from the other? The answer lies in the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, which ranks the sub-Saharan African nations comprehensively according to governance quality. The underlying idea of the index is to have an objective, quantifiable measuring tape and stimulate debate across societies about the criteria by which good governance should be best assessed. The index reviews the African governments based on 5 core categories: sustainable economic development, human development, particularly in health and education, transparency and empowerment of civil society, democracy and human rights, rule of law and security. Now, the Ibrahim Index is not a snapshot of current developments, but an analysis of trends with a focus on the well-being of the citizens. Well, joining us now are our guests. In London, we have Cameron DUODO. He's an analyst on African affairs. In Bergen, Norway, we have Lise Rakner. She's a professor of comparative politics at the University of Bergen, specialising in governance and democratisation. And in Berlin, Christian Portman. He's the director of global programmes at Transparency International. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Lise, could I start with you? Is a prize like this for a former leader really a good idea for Africa?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start this by congratulating former President Festus Mogae, President of Botswana, that I'm personally a great admirer of. And may I say, he's also a great friend of Norway and the Christian Michelsen Institute where I work. We've had lots of collaborations in the past. I think he is absolutely an outstanding candidate and worthy of most prizes that are awarded leaders who have promoted transparent and efficient rule. Now, to your question, whether this is a good idea in terms of promoting governance and ridding the African continent of corruption, that's a more complicated question, I would say.
Just briefly tell us.
On a positive note, it's a good thing that we're discussing governance in Africa. Whether promoting prizes to individuals is a good idea, generally, I'm more in doubt of.
Christian Portman, would you agree with that or disagree?
Well, let me also say that I very much congratulate Festus Mogae with this award. Festus is also a very good friend of Transparency International and a personal friend of mine. I do believe it's a good idea. I think that anything that will keep corruption at the top of the global agenda is important, and I think any incentive that can be provided to people at large by demonstration that corruption is something that should be eradicated, that should be dealt with, is a good thing.
Cameron DUODO in London, glowing remarks there for the winner of this year's prize, but you're not so certain about whether a prize should be awarded. You're not so certain about this whole index.
Well, I do congratulate Mr. Mogae on his being chosen for this. He did not set up the criteria by which the nominee is approved and the prize given. But what I would say is that having done it twice, in the past it was won by President or former President CHISSANO of Mozambique, and now it's gone to Mr. Mogae of Botswana. It is time for the prize committee to branch out and widen the criteria. Good governance does not only come from what presidents do, important though what presidents do is. What about the media, especially the private media that are not subsidized by governments, but which must bring governments to account if corruption is really to be fought in a country? What about enterprising people? I know, for instance, of a small company in Ghana called Nkulenu Industries. This company, for about 40 years, has struggled to send canned fruits, canned goods into the West for Africans in the diaspora. Their palm nut soup is fantastic. Nobody is helping a company of that type, although it could do a lot for people. And by example, get people to be enterprising.
Well, there is, of course,
an
argument.
It's only a small example.
There is an argument, of course, as to whether a prize should be given to an individual or groups, which we will touch upon later in the programme. I just want to come back to Christian Portman, with reference to what Cameron had to say. Is good governance, though, a priority for Africa, and to highlight good governance when Africa has so many problems, whether that be in health or education or even civil strife?
Governance is an important issue, not just for Africa. Governance is a global issue, and I think we would be gravely mistaken to think that governance is only an issue in certain parts of the world. So I think it's important. Coming to the case of Africa, I do believe that governance plays a very important role in all the areas that you're dealing with. I think governance, anti-corruption in particular, but transparency, accountability, is very important for the poor. Dealing with the poor, being effective in addressing the concerns of the poor is frequently very much tied into dealing with the issue of corruption. We can actually and have indications that, for instance, in meeting the Millennium Development Goals, there are some sectors that we've looked at where we have estimated that 25 to 35% of the investment actually disappears in one way or another. So dealing with governance is very important for the world, and in Africa, very important to deal effectively with poverty.
But isn't it also a chicken and egg situation, Lisa Ackner in Bergen, where to deal with the problem, you have to try and deal perhaps with the government that are going to solve the problem, or you deal with the problem first and try and get the government on board?
Clearly you're right. This is it's governance, and solving Africa's governance problems is going to take much more than a price. But I want to agree with the two former speakers, but I really like to pick up on what Cameron was saying just now, because I think the problem of prizes of this kind is that, in a sense, it just underscores, in my opinion, the gravest governance problem that Africa is facing, namely the enormous amount of power vested in the executive office, the enormous amount of power vested in normally one man, and this idea that one person one man is supposed to solve all ills. In fact, I think Africa's past has shown that this power vested in the executive office has caused more problems and more corruption and more poor governance than it has cured any ills. So in a sense, this prize, while focusing so much on one individual, in a sense just underscores, in my opinion, the problem more than pointing at solutions.
Cameron DUODO, can I just bring you in here and tackle another issue about governance? It's all very well to say good governance should be rewarded in Africa, but if we look historically, as Lise has just touched upon, lots of parts of Africa were under colonial rule for many years, and then those colonists, the colonies, the British, the Belgians, the Germans, they left, and they really didn't teach the next generation of those local inhabitants how to govern or what government was. Is that too simplistic an approach to the next stage of this debate? Is about teaching Africans how to govern themselves?
There is a point where you have to sit down and say, in fact, isn't this prize absurd? For the very reason that you have given. The colonial governor used to strut about the countryside in a Rolls Royce wearing a hat with ostrich feathers. When he left, the president or prime minister who took over, being a black man, kept the Rolls Royce, kept the outriders, and lived in government house to great pomp and ceremony. These people are pampered already. And to look at them and say, just because you've left office and we didn't find anything seriously wrong with you in terms of corruption, here you are with a huge amount of money that you can enjoy, is in a way a travesty of what should be happening. I mentioned the private media in Africa, radio stations and so on. I forgot to add that the judiciary is a great part of providing good governance in Africa. There are many African countries where up to today, the judges and the magistrates take everything down by longhand. They do not have good secretarial services. They cannot even give copies of their judgments to clients, to the people who come to the courts in order to ensure that good governance takes place. People have no power. They are confused and frustrated.
Well, let's just hold that thought there for a moment, Cameron. We're taking a short break now, but when we come back, what about Africa's other problems? Do stay with us here on Inside Story.